Welcome to this webinar. My name is Esther Zulu, and I am CEO and co-founder here at PRS 365. I'll be your moderator for this afternoon's webinar, titled Beyond the Spill, Zambia's Kafue River Disaster and its Aftermath. So just a brief background, as PRS 365, our core mission is really to develop practical and context-driven solutions to national and regional problems. And we really believe that the best solutions come from combining expert knowledge with real-world experiences, and that through talking to each other, providing platforms where we can share ideas, we can come up with solutions to those real-world problems. And so this is why we decided to put this webinar together. And it's really to move beyond just analyzing situations that happen towards actionable dialogue, which can then lead to accountability, it can lead to resilience, it can also lead to evidence-based responses to environmental challenges. And so in today's discussion, we really dive into what began as a reflection, an article that was produced by PRS, talking about the Kafue River disaster. And we dive now into talking about the effects of that Kafue River disaster, the scale of the disaster, and really talking about, the hard questions like, are we ready as a country to deal with such environmental disasters? And so thank you all for joining this discussion. And before we delve into it, I would like to introduce my distinguished panelists. This is a panel of experts who bring invaluable insights to help us to navigate these tough questions around this environmental disaster that our country faced. So to start with, I'll introduce Professor Kalava. Professor Felix Kalava is Director Research at Copperbelt University, and he's a leading expert in ecosystem services, climate change, sustainable development. His work has shaped national policies on climate resilience, biodiversity, and environmental governance. And so in this discussion, he will speak to us about the environmental implications of the spill, the biodiversity loss, and economic livelihood impacts for affected communities. I also have Dr. Lydia Hangulu on the panel. Dr. Lydia Hangulu is a health promotion specialist. She is an academician and a researcher, serving as Dean for the Faculty of Health Sciences at the Lusaka Apex Medical University. She's affiliated also with various associations, including the Zambia Consumer Association, and she has strong background in research, policy development, and has made significant contributions in matters relating to public health, consumer protection. So on our panel, she's really going to speak to us about the impact of the toxic spill on food safety, nutrition security, and also explore possible remedies to address these effects. Then I also have Dr. Nosiku Munyinda, sorry. Dr. Nosiku Munyinda is a lecturer and researcher in environment, pollution control, and toxicology at the School of Public Health of the University of Zambia. She has extensive experience in conducting research on heavy metals and is currently exploring their association with cognitive development in children. And so during this discussion, she'll delve into the public health risks of the spill, both short and long term, as well as our institutional capacity as a country to really respond to environmental health emergency. Then last but not least, I have Dr. Pamela Sambo on the panel. Dr. Sambo is a law lecturer at the University of Zambia and a specialist in environmental law, climate justice, and human rights. She is a member of several international legal bodies, including the IUCN Commission of Environmental Law, and she has also served as chairperson of the Human Rights Commission of Zambia. So of course, on this panel should delve into, provide insights on the legal implications of the incident, existing provisions for redress for the communities that have been affected, and also legislative gaps that may exist and make such incidences very difficult to address. So before we now get into the interesting discussions we're going to have, a few housekeeping issues. So this session is being recorded for documentation and learning purposes. Please kindly keep your microphones muted throughout the discussion just to minimize disruptions. And if you could kindly, apart from the panelists, if you could kindly keep your videos off as well, just so that we have good internet connection. And then also, if you have questions during the discussion, please post them in the chat box. And at the end of the discussion, we'll be able to pick some of those questions so that we can answer them. Thank you. So let's get into the discussion now. So for those who haven't been able to read the article that was published by PRS 365 about the spill and the basis on which this webinar was formed, I will give a brief summary of what the article talked about. And if you are interested in reading the full article, please feel free to read the article on our website, prs.org.zm, or look for the link on our social media pages, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on X. So where are we today? So the article really talks about what happened in February of this year, and it's around the Kafue. So we may be also asking, why has it sparked so much attention? So for those of us that don't know, the Kafue River is really vital to Zambia's ecosystem and ecological life, and it supports about 60% of our population in agriculture, in industry, and in biodiversity. And also it's critical for water supply, not just for the surrounding areas where the disaster happened, like Kitwe and Chambishi, but also for Lusaka water supply. And so what happened? So in February 2025, a tailings dam collapsed at Sino Metals Leach Mine and released 50 million liters of toxic waste. And so this caused the water to be toxic, right? The water getting into the Kafue River. And what we saw, I think a number of us saw those pictures on social media of crops dying, but there was also 100 kilometers downstream, there was also fish that died, right? We saw the fish, the pictures of the fish in the river. So it contaminated crops, it led to death of fish, but it also led to cutting off of water for 700,000 people in Kitwe because the water was unsafe for drinking. And so we do know that from studies elsewhere, there have been also metal poisoning just because of the spills like this that happened in February. And so what was the response to this? So shortly after the spill, the government, through the Air Force, dispersed 100 tons of lime into the river to neutralize the acidic contamination. And there were also speedboats that were sent along the river to try and, mitigate the toxic spillage into the river. So from our research, and what the article really highlights is that the lime mitigates the acidity of the river, but may not be sufficient to mitigate the toxic from heavy metals. And so this is something, again, that we'll discuss, and we'll hear from Professor Kalava in a few minutes. And another thing that happened was that the mine where this toxic spillage happened was then tasked with an environmental impact assessment rather than the Zambia Environment Management Agency. I should mention here that we did reach out to ZEMA, and they wanted to join so that they could also tell us their side of the story and what's happening. However, they were unable to join due to competing priorities. So what we know is that, and what the article really highlights is that in other places where such spillages have happened, for instance, in Brazil in 2015, there was a heavy metal spillage from a mine, and the effects of this spillage continued years after the incident. And this is also similar to Guinea. Another mine spillage there led to decades of waste, caused 90% of fish decline. It also caused birth defects and rainforest loss. So these are just some of the things that the article highlights. So now, given all these things, we want to now hear from our panelists what the different effects are and what we can do about them. So I'll start with Professor Kalaba. Given the importance of the Kafue River in terms of the ecosystem, please help us understand what the effects are on environment and biodiversity. What are the environmental and biodiversity implications of the spill, both immediate and long term? And apart from that, what's the scale as well? Because we know, of course, the areas around the spillage are directly affected, but could this also affect the Kafue River further downstream and affect all those areas as well? Or is it something that is contained just within the directly affected areas? Yeah, over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm glad to be with you all and discuss this very important topic. I think that has severely affected the Copper Belt, and not only the Copper Belt, but Zambia as a whole. So when you look at heavy metals and impacts on our ecosystem, directly we know that heavy metals impact on aquatic ecosystem, affecting aquatic life. There are also, and when you look at the impact on aquatic life, you're looking at the fish, you're looking at the other reptiles that are found in the river, as well as other amphibians. So there are these impacts that we have on the aquatic ecosystem. So this impact on the aquatic ecosystem affects the functioning of the aquatic ecosystem, but also the organisms themselves, impacting even on their health. It is also important to note that when you look at heavy metals, there's also what is called as bioaccumulation, where you find that as the ecosystem is impacted and organisms are subjected to these heavy metals, they tend to actually accumulate, and then this can actually have severe impacts on even human life. This is why when we had the spill, there was a lot of awareness that people are not supposed to eat fish from the Kafue River. We also have another challenge of sediment contamination, where these heavy metals can settle in the river sediments, and this can actually persist for a very long period of time. It is also important to note that when you look at heavy metals pollution, there are also other impacts more on the terrestrial ecosystem, and by terrestrial ecosystem, you're looking at on land. We may wish to know that a number of our farmers on the Copper Belt and downstream, they actually do their irrigation using water from the Kafue River. So what that simply then means is that the water is contaminated. The soil also ends up being contaminated. Now, it is also important to note that this does not just end at the aquatic as well as the terrestrial. It even affects the birds, because think of the many birds have you found the birds that fly around and they prey on particular fish species from our rivers, as well as other things from the land. So you see that there are all these impacts that heavy metal accumulation has on our system. So this is quite terrible. So talk of water contamination, soil contamination, and I'm sure my colleagues will delve more into the impact on development, because we know that exposure to heavy metals can actually even impact on the development of children. So this affects even the women, pregnant women. Now, moving on to these impacts of heavy metal pollution in the Kafue River. Now, think of the Kafue River and how long it is. Downstream, so this problem is not just a Copper Belt problem. If you remember very well, they said Copperbelt water supply was cut, but eventually issues went around to Mpongwe, down to Mumbwa. So I think it is important to note that these heavy metals, they're not stationed, they actually move. And there are a number of factors that can actually affect their movement. One would be the heavy metals themselves, as well as the flow of the river and so on and so forth. So all in all, we can safely say that even downstream people are actually affected. In literature, we do not have the actual kilometers to say after this number of kilometers you'll be safe, but this is because there are a lot of other factors. Now, when you look at these impacts, we have the immediate impacts now, but there are also future impacts, because when you look at the degradation, for example, of our land, the degradation of the soil, this is not going to sort out a problem of one farming season, but of many farming seasons that are to come. So we have these impacts that are going to be with us for a very, very long time. One, because of land degradation. But linked to that is reduced yields. So you will notice that even when crops start now growing, the yields will still reduce, because it will take time for these to be the situation to be ameliorated, so that our soils can actually go to the right levels of production. Now, all these come with serious economic losses, because when you look at where the Kafue River is, there are a lot of livelihoods that depend on the Kafue River. The farmers, those that are into agriculture, those that are into fishing. So what has happened is that due to these negative impacts, we know that the fish died, they found fish floating everywhere. So that has got a lot of impacts that continue to actually affect our people. So this leads therefore to serious economic losses. So I think in short, these are some of the impacts that I'll talk about, the impacts of this pollution on our ecosystems, but also on our livelihoods. And I must be quick to mention that the pollution in our of the Kafue River has led to the disturbance of the functioning of our ecosystems. Now, ecosystem provides all these ecosystem services, which are benefits that human beings obtain from these ecosystems. But what has happened now is that these have been disrupted, and the quality of ecosystem services that flow therefore from the Kafue River has actually been compromised. So these are the huge impacts that the pollution in the Kafue River has had on the ecosystem, but not only on the ecosystem, but also on the livelihoods of people, and consequently on the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. You kind of answered what my next question was going to be already, because then I was going to ask you, okay, there are these environmental effects, but what are the economic impacts? However, my question is for those that are not so obvious. So we know, of course, farmers are affected, but what about the not so obvious people that they are affected, but they may not even know that they are that affected by this economically just because of the contamination? What can you say about that?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Let me start answering that question by making a very quick reflection of one of the studies that I did a couple of years ago. So a couple of years ago, I wanted to find out the levels of contamination of vegetables that are found in the markets around the Copperbelt, and the student working in Mufulira. So we just went to a couple of markets to buy vegetables in Utondo and Kankolo areas. And after buying these vegetables, we took them to the lab just to test the heavy metal content. And our results obviously showed that quite a number of those vegetables, the heavy metal contamination was actually high. It was actually beyond the WHO standards. So what I'm therefore trying to say is that when you look at these impacts, it's not just about the farmers that are around, but a lot of other people. The people that depend on those that eat vegetables from these areas. But also, the other impacts that you also notice is that with the negative impacts of this pollution in the Kafue, pressure can actually be sent elsewhere. So what that simply means is that if people are not going to do their fishing, if they're not going to do their agriculture because of the land being disturbed, degradation, what next? There'll be other impacts like we have to survive. Can we produce our charcoal? Can we cut down trees? So we need to note that when you look at the livelihoods that people engage in, they are actually intertwined. So when one is not doing well, it may actually lead to a lot of pressures on the other. But there are also other impacts. Like, for example, when you talk of pollination, you expect the bees to move from one point to the other. Now, the question is, what if these bees sit on plants that are highly contaminated with heavy metals? So it means that they'll actually fly around. It also reminds me of another study we did a couple of years ago where we're looking at the quality of honey. That study was in Kayema. And then when we took the honey to the lab, we were shocked to find that this particular honey had a high concentration of nicotine. Why? Because the bees were actually sitting on a tobacco farm. So meanwhile, here's a person in Lusaka who is living a healthy life and not taking sugar, and they only take honey. But meanwhile, they are taking honey that is heavily contaminated as nicotine. The same thing applies with the fish. You say, I don't eat red meat, I'm a healthy person, I want to live a healthy life, I only eat white meat, I only take fish. And the fish that you're taking is full of heavy metals. So this is actually coming with a lot of complications on our human health, not only in the immediate environment, but in the society as a whole.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, yeah, that's very scary to hear because we're out here trying to be healthy, but we don't know what we're consuming, which takes us nicely into the next, talking to the next panelist who's an expert in food safety and health systems, Dr. Hangulu. What are the food safety concerns? I think we've heard from Professor Kalava how it's not just the immediate farming communities that are affected. It's not just the fish, it's also the vegetables because they're coming from the farmers. It's also downstream, it's also the bees and the ecosystem. So what are the food safety concerns when heavy metal pollution of this nature occurs? And, for communities that are dependent on food coming from water, that's coming from crops that have been watered, right, by this water coming from a polluted river. Does it seep into the food? Does it get neutralized when you boil? Because, like for bacteria that goes into food, they tell us to boil our water. When you cook the food, the bacteria dies. Is it a similar situation for heavy metal contamination of this sort? Or is it different? So yeah, maybe you can speak to that.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you very much, Prof. Kalava, for the background that you have given. So in the context of this accident from the mining sector, so just to mention common metals that we're talking about here, I'll mention a few that most people are aware of, not that this is an exhaustive list, but the most common ones that we know are copper, cobalt, zinc, and then we have also mercury, and also we have lead. So when you look at these metals, for example, copper and cobalt, these are essential metals that are required by our bodies to generate red blood cells. But we get these elements from organ meat, such as liver, the heart, the kidneys, the tongue, the brain, and the intestines. So when you talk about other heavy metals such as lead and mercury, our bodies do not need these metals because they are carcinogenic, they cause cancer. So when we talk about all these metals that we're talking about, how do we get intoxicated with them? So it's through our food chain. So we know that the Kafue River is polluted, contaminated. Then it means, how do we have them in our bodies? It's through our food chain. What do we mean? So from the contaminated water through irrigation, these heavy metals can percolate and find themselves into the soils. And through agriculture, we plant our vegetables, so they can find themselves in the vegetables and the fruits. Then from the fruits and vegetables, they can find our way into our bodies through the veggies that we eat, and also through the fruits that we eat, and also through pastures into animals. And then we eat the animals. So it's a circle. So in excess, it means we'll have problems with our health. What kind of problems are we talking about? We have neurological disorders, liver dysfunction, kidney failure, and also which can cause disability and also can lead to death, and also other results are cancer. So following the contamination that happened, it means the communities around the affected areas, it means they've lost their livelihood. It means they can't irrigate their crops. Their crops have died. They can't engage in farming. Their animals, they don't have pasture for them to eat. And also, what does it mean? It means also, in the long run, we will never have food, we will never have fish, we will never have enough protein, we will never have enough vegetables, and also we are likely to have a population that has a lot of health problems. So it means no rearing of animals, no pastures, no fresh water, and also no aquatic life. And all these effects lead to food shortages, and also food shortages lead to poor nutrition. And also if we have poor nutrition, it means we have poor health. And also poor health leads to death. So in short, what are we saying? The pollution that has occurred has an impact on all of us. Already we are facing drought issues in the country. So think of the communities that have been affected. So one way or another, all of us are affected, because when you look at the Kafue River, this is where we get water for irrigation, and also we get the fish. So there's still fish that is being sold on the market. Do we know where it's coming from? Do we even know the content of the protein itself? Does it have heavy metals? So when we look at the consumers out there, they have no capacity to test these things. So these would be the long-term and short-term repercussions that we anticipate. So what are some of the things that we can do maybe to try and curb the situation? We know that heavy metals, like the previous speaker said, they are found in the environment for a long, long, long time. So when you look at these heavy metals, you can't see them by our own naked eyes, and also you can't boil them to eradicate them. It needs proper cleaning up process. We appreciate the government efforts that they have put up a team that was there to at least reduce the acidity of the water and also the soils. But we don't have full information on how far the toxicity has been, or we can't quantify the damage that was caused. So that kind of information will be very helpful for the people, for them to be able to be vigilant in case such kind of an accident happen anywhere else, so that people can be aware of the damage and the impact at every level. Yeah. So we also need to make the effects known to the public. So everyone needs to be aware of the effects of these damages that have been caused to our ecosystem, to the Kafue River, and also to the soils around the communities that are there. Then also we need cleanup. Cleanup has been done, but also cleanup is not just a once-off campaign or effort. It requires a long time cleanup campaign and also monitoring of such kind of interventions that are put in place. So there's need for ongoing monitoring. So also the other issues that need to be put in place are that definitely the livelihood, the communities that are along these affected areas, these were their livelihood: fishing, agriculture, and also other agricultural practices that are around these communities. So this is what their livelihood are all about. So rearing of animals. So we need to find alternative livelihood for these particular communities that are affected. So where are we going to find the land for them? So all these are implications, future implications for this kind of spillage that has happened. So imagine you are one of the affected family. You've been living in this community for a long time. The only life that you know is fishing. The only life that you know is agriculture. The only life that you know is rearing of animals. And now this accident has happened. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go to? So when we talk about we need to compensate, we need also to know how much is there to be compensated. and what will the compensation cover?
Yeah.
And also for how long will this compensation be? So these are some of the issues that we need to look at. And also look at the water. Water is life. If all the water has been polluted, where will we find alternative sources of water? Already there's a shortage of water in the world. So what happens to our water? Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much for those insights. I think very important insights, just noting that just what has been done so far, it's not necessarily that the heavy metals have disappeared, they're still there. And so we're still all at risk through consuming food that comes from crops that are irrigated by the Kafue River and so on. So that, I think, takes us nicely to our next panelist, who is Dr. Munyinda. So Dr. Munyinda, I think also Dr. Hangulu already touched on this a little bit about the public health, both short-term and long-term impacts on public health and other possible diseases. So we've already heard that part of the metals that were part of the toxic waste that went into the river are carcinogenic, for instance. So what groups are vulnerable to this? You know, I think there are those special groups. I think even Professor Kalava alluded to this. So what can you tell us about the public health impacts? And in line with that also, looking at Zambia's public health system and our institutional capacities, are we ready? Are we equipped to deal with the public health impacts of such disasters? Over to you, Dr. Munyinda. Dr. Munyinda, are you still there? Okay, I think she may be experiencing connectivity issues. So as we wait for her to join back in, I will move on to the next panelist.
She's back.
Dr. Munyinda, are you there now? Can we hear from you?
For that,
Yes, we can now hear you. Please go ahead.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Esther, and thank you for this opportunity to speak about health effects and the public health angle. So like you said, I think Dr. Hangulu talked a little bit about the effects, but I just want to start by talking about heavy metals in general and why we should be concerned from a public health angle. These metals, as has been said already, bioaccumulate. They bioaccumulate in the environment, they don't break down easily, and some, such as lead, mercury, can take even decades in the environment, in the soil, in the water. And when it comes to human health, these metals, once they enter in our bodies from the various exposure pathways that we talked about, they can take up to, in blood, they can take up to 3 months. Lead is up to 1 to 2 months. Cadmium goes up to 4 months in our blood before they move to other body systems. So after they leave the blood, then they go into the kidneys, they go into the liver, they go into other body systems where they take much, much longer to come out. So in terms of them coming out of our bodies, they're usually excreted through urine, through sweat, through feces, through fecal matter. And so sometimes you find them in hair, you find them in nails, in teeth. So they do have a very long residence time in our bodies, and that's why we need to be concerned about the health effects. So in terms of what kind of effects, for example, with the spillage that we're talking about, we focused a lot on the ecosystems, which is understandable. But for the people that are living around that river, some of them could have experienced acute effects that were not picked. So maybe some had abdominal pains, maybe some had numbness, maybe some had excessive sweating, and so on. So apart from the chronic effects, cancer, neurological effects that have already been talked about, issues to do with cardiovascular diseases, you do have some acute effects that will show immediately after heavy metal poisoning. So whether or not our health systems were able to pick that, again, that stands to be discussed. And I must mention here that the level of poisoning or toxicity in the body depends on the dosage. So again, the focus was a lot on the acid, so the pH of the water. I think all of us knew that the pH had gone to as low as 3 or 4. The dosages of the heavy metals up to now, I don't know, maybe Professor Kalaba can advise if that was done, if we know the dosages that were found in the river after the discharge. As far as I know, I will probably hear from the studies that are being conducted by the firm that has been engaged. So we need to know what the dosages are for us to be able to tell exactly what the effects will be. The other issue that we have to talk about is the underlying conditions of people. People are different, our physiological makeup is different, our DNA is different. So the way that the effects will manifest in the body will be very different from person to person. So for example, if somebody already has exposure to other chemicals, and then they're taking this water every day that has heavy metals, they're eating vegetables that have heavy metals every day, the effects will be much more pronounced in a person like that. And then you also have to think about the people that are working in these kind of environments who are exposed both from the occupational angle as well as the community or public health angle. So there are a lot of different aspects that we have to think about when we look at public health effects. Esther, I lost internet for a bit. I don't know if you had already asked the question on, are we prepared from a public health point of view?
Yes, please go
Okay.
ahead.
So
How prepared are we? Yes.
That's a very good question. Esther, in terms of our training, we do know that public health encompasses environmental health. So in principle, environmental health is captured under public health. And most of our environmental health training, I can speak to the one that we give here at UNZA, and I'm sure other universities as well, we have a pillar on pollution control and toxicology under environmental health. So that's in terms of public health in principle. But when it comes to the systems, I'm sure you'll agree with me that on the ground, you rarely find tests being conducted on chemicals in water. On the ground, public health, we're seeing more of a bias towards infectious diseases, towards the more public health that we've accepted as public health diseases. So TB, HIV, and even cancer itself as a public health disease. So we're focused more on the curative or the treatment side and not so much on the preventive side. So to answer your question in brief, no, we are definitely not prepared because we don't have systems to take care of this kind of environmental emergencies to do with chemicals. We need to be able to functionally provide for testing of our environmental systems to see how much of these contaminants we have in our water to start with, how much of them have gone into our food, how much of them are in our soil, before we even talk about how much of them are we carrying in our human bodies. So maybe from the environmental side, I could say that we do have analytical capacity in our labs to test for the various chemicals in the environmental media. When it comes to ourselves as human beings, apart from Kafue, to the best of my knowledge, Kafue, where we have the lead poisoning, and we, through the World Bank funded project, we do have some facilities there that are testing for lead. We have a lab at UNZA, at Vet Lab, where we're doing some blood lead testing. To the best of my knowledge, we are not doing toxic chemical testing in human beings. I think only UTH has an accredited lab, the toxicology lab at UTH, that can do that in humans. So how many of us have even thought about going to test for our levels of heavy metals in our blood, for example? When we go to the hospital, how many of us think about whether the kidney problem I have is because I have too many chemicals in my body? So in terms of preparedness, in terms of response time from a public health, a human health angle, we are definitely not prepared. And I think this should be serving as a wake-up call. We need to put in the systems that will support the nexus between public health and chemical exposures, between environmental contamination and public health. We can talk about it in theory, But do we have the systems on the ground? And the short answer to that is we don't have the systems on the ground. How many tailings dams do we have in Zambia? Are we waiting for another one to burst before we can start following up the people? And again, if you notice from what we've been looking at, we're talking about livelihoods. So it's mostly about the economy. Of course, we have to eat. But who's talking about the chronic effects on the populations that are around that river? Those of us that are buying the vegetables Dr. Kalaba was talking about, we don't know where the vegetables we're eating are coming from. So how are we going to monitor the impact, not just from this spillage, but from all the other spillages that we have? A trickle, day by day, we have chemical contamination in our ecosystems. How are we monitoring that in terms of our human health outcomes? We're talking about increased cancer in Zambia. We're talking about increased kidney diseases, increased cardiovascular diseases. How are we linking those to environmental contaminants? So again, the short answer to your question is we're definitely not prepared. And if we're not prepared, then even our response to the spillage from a health perspective, I think our response, as at now, I have not heard any response from a health perspective. I stand to be corrected. I have not heard Ministry of Health say anything about whether we're checking the health status of the populations around those communities, or even in Kitwe, the water that people are drinking now. Yes, maybe the acid has been neutralized, but how about the heavy metals in that water? Who's actually checking the levels of heavy metals in the water, whether or not it's safe to drink now for the people?
Yeah.
And I'm not even going to go into the children because that's another discussion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Mnyinda. I think this is very enlightening and again, very devastating for all of us to hear that we are not prepared to deal with such environmental disasters. And so far, I think we've heard what the situation is. The situation doesn't look good. We heard from Professor Kalaba how far-reaching the contamination is and the effects are. It's not just the immediate places, but it's also the places downstream. So all of us are affected. We've also heard again from Dr. Hangulu how our food is not as safe as we think it is because of the contamination. And now we've heard from Dr. Mnyinda how from a public health perspective, from a health systems perspective, we are not ready to deal with the effects of such environmental disasters. And like something that I would just like to highlight, like Dr. Mnyinda said, these effects, and I think every speaker has mentioned that they are far-reaching. The metals remain in the soil and in the water for prolonged periods of time. So think about the women that are pregnant now, their children are then at risk of birth defects, right? So it's really a sad situation. But then, which brings us to the next thing. Now that we're here and this has happened, what do we do? And I think from our standpoint as PRS, we always like to solve problems, look for solutions. So now we're looking to our next speaker to help us understand from a legal perspective, what legal issues, what key legal issues does this incident raise? And to what extent do our existing environmental laws and frameworks adequately address incidents of this nature? And I think I'll just also combine this so that we are moving with time. So we have that question, but also coming now to think about the ones who have been identified as directly affected. I think on 30th May, it was, Newsdiggers published an article where the Minister of Mines announced that Sino Metals would be compensating 507 farmers who were identified as affected by the spill with a total of 16 million kwacha, which equals approximately 31,000 kwacha to each farmer, right? In the same article, the minister highlighted how the effects on the soil is not just for this farming season, it will also be for next farming season. And I think we've heard from our panelists that the effects of this spillage will continue for years to come. We don't even know how many years, because at this point, we are not sure of the levels of toxicity. So given all those things, Dr. Sambo, I'd like you to speak to, first of all, what our environmental laws and frameworks, and then secondly, how can communities affected seek redress for this, and what they are being offered so far, is it adequate? And also just to speak about those who are indirectly affected, what redress do they have? Because so far, these people who've been identified are those who are farming around the affected area. But we've heard that the reach is further than that. So what can people do about this? Dr. Sambo, over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you to all the listeners that we have participating in this important subject. I think my colleagues before me have given an elaborate explanation in terms of what we are faced with, in terms of the extent of environmental damage that we must anticipate. And as a starting point, I have so much to say, but I will try to just package it in a summarized form for the understanding of everybody. I think the problem is real, and the full extent of the problem cannot be underestimated. My colleagues have shown us that as human beings, we are at the center of this environment that is slowly being polluted. And I'm happy to say that the law that we have in Zambia is at the moment moving in line with international good practices. And I like to argue that we have one of the best environmental framework laws around the continent. The question I ask myself is the implementation, the enforcement, compliance. That is where we are lacking. So for instance, when we get started with the Environmental Management Act, which is the framework legislation for the environment in Zambia, you find that it has an elaborate definition of what the environment is. And you go to section, I think it's section 1 or section 2, the environment is defined in a very wide frame, in line with what my 3 colleagues who've spoken before me have said. The environment is everything, including myself, all the man-made structures, the rivers, the detail that we have around us. And that goes in line with what we have, that since we are at the center of the ecosystem, everything around us affects us. I liked it when Professor Kalaba gave the example of bees in Nkeyema producing honey, which was later found to have tobacco. And most of us swear that we don't touch tobacco. It is not what we touch physically that the environment and environmental boundaries. That is why what I do in my yard has the potential to affect somebody who is thousands of kilometers away. So we have to take into consideration a responsible way of managing our environment from the personal level. And I'm very happy that we have this discussion, because the Constitution, as the supreme law, gives each one of us a duty to protect the environment. And the current Constitution we have as at 2016 has an elaborate section, I think it's section part 19 of the Constitution, entitled Land and Environment. It has elaborate provisions there which talk about the environment as our national heritage, the environment as everybody's duty. The issue of sustainable management principles is part of the national values. So when you take the Constitution together with the Environmental Management Act and other sectoral laws that touch on the environment, such as the Mines and Minerals Development Act, which incidentally has a whole section about environmental protection, you find that the provisions there are beautiful. I, for one, do not fight with the provisions that we have. I have a challenge with what we are doing with the beautiful laws that are sitting and gathering dust in our offices. So that said, I want to move in terms of understanding what legal avenues are available to everybody, I won't say to the people who are along the Kafue River basin. I won't say the people that are in Chingola, Chilabombwe, Kitwe, where there's immediate pollution from the surrounding mines. It is you and me listening to this message. And the greatest challenge, again, that we have is we don't talk enough about these issues that have profound effect on our livelihood. We don't talk so much about environmental issues, yet without a wholesome environment, we do not have a guarantee of life to do other economic activities that we want to talk about. So I'll just focus mainly on the Environmental Management Act and the provisions that we have in the Mines and Minerals Development Act, because that is actually the source of the pollution. So first and foremost, when I go to the Environmental Act, I think we have section 4, where each one of us, and it just says, the wording of the section is that every person in Zambia has the right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And the section goes on to say, you do not have to show special interest in order to get up and find mechanisms for bringing environmental community in River about that they've lost crops. Each one of us has that right. And when we talk about legal principles, for instance, we have a legal principle where you must show proximity. You have in order for you to go to court. That is not so when you look at the Environmental Management Act. Under the Environmental Management Act, even a suspicion or the likelihood that what has happened has the potential to destroy the environment gives anyone a right to go before the courts. There are several other provisions within the Act itself that are so facilitative of taking action in the environmental interest. One other advantage that is in the Act is that if you are seen to be acting in the interest of the environment, and there is proof that your only motivation was to conserve and protect the environment, there's no court that can order damages, that can order legal costs against you, because what you're doing is in terms of preserving the environment as our national heritage. So I'm hoping that I am activating the minds of everybody here. I've seen a lot of worried questions coming up in the chat. What can we do, and how can we be more active? I think for a start, I would like to invite everybody to read the Environmental Management Act. It's very user-friendly. You don't need to be a lawyer to understand what is in there. Look at how much power lies in each one of us to do something about the environment. And this, in a way, is to answer the question that relates directly to, do I think there is a realistic prospect of success for the affected communities? I have already said that the affected community is you and me. Now, more specifically to those who have suffered direct injury, the farmers that have lost crops, the fishermen that have lost a livelihood because there's perhaps a ban on fishing in the area, those are more directly affected. What are we going to do to support them? We can take up legal action. And the history we have in our country is that we've had quite a number of challenges in terms of getting appropriate and meaningful remedies out of the court systems. And I need to mention just one or two challenges that make that a challenge and a big problem for accessing environmental justice. My colleagues have already talked about the challenges that we have. I think specifically, Dr. Munyinda talked about the challenges that we have in getting scientific evidence. I'll talk about evidence because that is what we need. And that is a big challenge in environmental cases. No matter how good a case is, you must have a causal link. I must be able to prove in court that the mental, the health, the ill health that I am suffering is as a result of something that has happened in the environment. As we speak now, we should be able to get some sort of proof that the acid and the high levels of acidity, the heavy metals that are in the Kafue River are responsible for this and that ailment that we are getting. That is one of the biggest challenges that is likely to affect even the cases that are currently being prepared for court with respect to that aspect. However, courts around the world are moving towards looking at a more relaxed approach towards environmental injury. And I think our courts here should be amenable once we show the basis, once we show that other countries around the world are moving towards a more relaxed evidential proof for harm, we are likely to get somewhere in terms of getting adequate legal redress. I think the specific question you asked me in terms of the approximately 31,000 kwacha that has been offered to those who suffered harm. Outrightly, I'll say that it is a drop in the ocean. It's peanuts. It doesn't. Why am I saying that? First of all, I'll start from the premise that I am of the view that set that don't amount taking into consideration the mental harm is. We've been told the
Dr.
water,
Sampo, maybe you can turn off your
soil.
video so that the internet is better.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
I was
I
wondering.
think much better.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So in terms of trying now to understand the adequacy of that 31,000 kwacha, as I said, it is not adequate. We've already got scientific experts here before who have told us that the soil is contaminated, and it is not contaminated just for 2 days, 3 days. The commendable effort of trying to reduce the acidity of the water and the soils around the Kafue River basin, it has not taken care of the presence of mercury and other heavy metals that come from the concentrate of what we know comes from the tailings dams. So the futuristic impact of what has happened, it cannot be quantified. And even if it cannot be quantified, it certainly will not be 31,000 kwacha. At the very minimum, 31,000 kwacha is far from being adequate. Because like I mentioned, environmental damage has no limit. We do not know how far and wide it is going. So maybe one more hope I can give to the listeners is when you pick up the Environmental Management Act, it empowers ZEMA as one of the regulatory authorities that come into play when such an incident happens. I would invite those that can lay their hands on the Environmental Management Act to look at sections 101 to 111, where we have enforcement provisions. These enforcement provisions, to me, are excellent on paper. I look to a day when we'll be able to actualize these enforcement mechanisms. They are beautiful. For instance, if you look at section 104, for instance, which talks about protection orders. As the name of the order suggests, ZEMA, once it has realistic evidence that something is likely to happen, which is going to be of a negative effect on the environment, they can go out in line with the provisions of that section and give a protection order to the owner of a premise that is lending environmental harm. There are so many other orders. There are prevention orders, there are restoration orders, compliance orders, cost orders. But as I'm on a mission today to annoy or activate the public We also have, as a public, a right under the enforcement measures where we can have a civil action initiated by any person to sue for damages in respect of environmental harm. How many of
Yeah.
us have taken up the challenge? We
Okay.
also have mechanisms where, as affected or interested parties towards the environment, we can initiate these mechanisms. And
Mm-hmm.
also, the Constitution as well as the Environmental Management Act are very clear in terms of citizen participation. How many of us
Okay.
have taken keen interest to go? I know it involves transport to go to Kitwe and everything, but that is beyond the value of the life that we enjoy, to find ourselves and see the extent of what happened around the source of the pollution. These
Okay.
should be areas that are available to us. So maybe in a nutshell, let me just say the onus is on us. The law
Yes.
is on our side.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Sambo. And I think ultimately we never have enough time to discuss such important, critical things that happen in our environment and in our country. But yeah, I think this has been a great discussion so far. And we heard so much about also how our environmental laws are great, but it's a matter of enforcement, and it's a matter of everybody also stepping up and doing your part. And so unfortunately, we do not have the authorities here. I've seen a number of people commenting in the chat box about, we should have invited the authorities to also come and speak. We did send out some invitations, but they were not able to come. I'm sure they have competing priorities. However, I think it's still good to talk about these things and continue talking about them, because these are effects that will be impacting us even for the future. So now we go into some questions. We will take just a few questions looking at the time. However, we will try to follow up as PRS with a write-up of this discussion and try to answer some of the questions that have been asked that we won't be able to answer right now. So the first question is related to long-term monitoring of Kafue and other river basins. And I think maybe Professor Kalawai can speak to this. Do we have long-term monitoring systems of these important ecosystems? Who does the monitoring? And are there any reports that are publicly available? Professor Kalawai, I think you can take this one. And then the next one is more about the tailings dam spillages might never be 100% preventable. What should be done to make sure these disasters are not occurring, especially seeing the emphasis government is putting on increasing mining, which might increase these risks? So what can be done to ensure that such things don't happen in the future? So Professor Kalawai, I think I'll give you 2 minutes to answer these questions, and then we can move on to the next set of questions.
Okay, thank you so much. So the first one on the long-term monitoring of our critical rivers, I think one of the things that you will notice is that we have not built enough data and research whereby you have this monitoring going on. Quite all right, from the Zambia point of view, they are not here. They do monitor like effluents, but these are mainly linked to particular industries. But when it comes to a database, for example, where you go and say, this is what is happening, I think this is an area that requires improvement. I know Kafue University is trying to put up a center of excellence around the Kafue River to try and understand the pollution levels. But at the moment, you don't have that. Coming to the issues around tailing dams. Now, you've brought up a very, very important topic. Tailing dam spillage, these are things that cannot be completely stopped. But yes, there are measures. For example, when you are putting up a tailings dam, there are particular things that needs to be done, and they're supposed to be monitored. Now, there are a lot of other challenges where you find that if you begin to disturb these tailing dams, look at what is happening in the copper belt. You find that we are mining into some of these tailing dams or tailing dams. People are going back to get everything, and so that is a huge problem. And I must also mention that we are disturbing these, and with some seismic movements, what is going to happen is that with heavy rainfall, people have built houses even around tailing dams. What may happen is that some of these tailing dams, these houses will be covered up because of maybe a huge, when huge massive land, when we have, a heavy rain. So I think we need to be careful about that. I also wanted just to also mention that these problems we're talking about in terms of mining and pollution, remember there's gold mining now that has started in a lot of places now, the reports are on Mufumbwe and everywhere around the country. That is also bringing a lot of problems. Remember with gold, there may also be mercury issues, mercury, because they use mercury in the processing. So these are huge problems. So as we talk about mining and increasing the scale, the problems that we're seeing in the Kafue are just but a tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of other problems. Unfortunately, in places where we may not even go and be report, where they cannot actually report the impact. So in summary, that's what I want to say. Yeah.
Thank you. And so I think what I'm hearing is also that we don't have enough data. That we have a lack of evidence, both from the environment side and also from the public health side, for us to be able to, we do the monitoring, but we need to improve on the monitoring and also just improve on our data collection mechanisms to be able to get enough data on the environment, but also on the public health side. And so next questions that are coming from the audience, Nosiku, Dr. Muninda, I think you can take these ones. How can communities protect themselves from potential long-term health impact? So of course, we've heard that it's very difficult to detect metal contamination, and even like boiling the food and cooking the food can't help. But what can communities do then in this instance? And what measures or initiatives are being put in place to avoid health problems associated with this spillage? If you know them, I know maybe the Ministry of Health would be the best to answer this, but from public health school, for instance, is there anything that is being done to avoid the health problems associated? Dr. Mninda, you have 2 minutes also.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Am I audible, Esther?
Yes, you are audible. No, you're audible. We can hear you.
Thank you. I'll keep my video. I'll keep my video off. And maybe to start answering, I'll start with the previous question. In my previous life, I'm a former Zema employee, so I sort of have an idea of what happens at Zema with regards to monitoring. And I can say that there are some initiatives that are there for long-term monitoring, particularly for the Kafue Basin, because it's such an important ecosystem. But these are usually project specific. So there is some data that's available from some studies that have been conducted in the past with CBU and UNZA and Zema as well. And currently, with regards to what Professor Kalaba mentioned on artisanal gold mining, there are some projects on mercury trying to reduce exposure to mercury from artisanal gold mining. But I must mention that these are specific. So usually government, unfortunately, they still work in silos. So there are some projects that are there, some monitoring is there. And if you go to the Zema website or you go to Zema, you will find some reports on the Kafue Basin. And some students who also did their studies on the Kafue Basin, there are some reports in the documentation center at Zema. So that's for the previous question. The question you've asked me on how do communities protect themselves, like you said, I think we're very good at raising, of course, people need to know the harm that is there, but then what do they do? So what's within our control as communities is nutrition, for example. Heavy metals have been found to be absorbed more if somebody is malnourished. So take, for example, a child that doesn't have enough calcium in the body, but then they're exposed to lead or any other heavy metals, the body will think that the lead is calcium, and so the body will take up the lead more. And you find that children who are better nourished will have less of the heavy metals absorbed. So you can improve your nutrition and thereby sort of block the heavy metals from being absorbed more in the body. Some vitamins have been found to also help with removing heavy metals from the body. Selenium, for example, vitamin C has also been found to be effective in removing heavy metals from the body. In terms of what is currently being done, I can say that in Kafue, I know that we've made some headways with regards to chelation, something called chelation therapy, where a certain drug is given to children or people that have very heavy metal poisoning in the body, and this binds with the heavy metals, and you are able to excrete it through urine. But that is only happening in Kafue, and it had to be a government-driven project because this kind of treatment is not something that you can buy over the counter. So
Yeah.
with regards to what is being done, I'm not sure whether there's a streamlined response from the public health side on the health
Okay.
effects. Without the diagnosis, without knowing how much contamination is there in the bodies, it's very difficult to come up with a program. But this is something that we should definitely look out for, especially for the
Okay.
communities that are close to the pollution. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you, Dr. Mninda. I think that's very helpful for us too on this call. Please make sure you drink your vitamin C. It might save you from these health impacts. But yes, also very helpful on the information on where data can be found and where there are reports. I think for those who are interested, please look out on the PRS website and our social media pages. We'll be able to share that information with you. So I think last set of questions before we go into the closing. Dr. Sambo, in what ways do you think, in your opinion, can corporate entities and industries operating near, especially Zambia's rivers, be held accountable for preventing future spills? I think you did talk to us and tell us, like give us a nice pep talk and encouragement that it's all our responsibility and we should be able to hold accountable those who are dealing directly with the environment and may cause harm to it. But what are the steps that communities can take, like practical steps? And then also, are there any, I think you did say that our environmental laws are great and they are beautifully put and beautifully written, but is there anything else in terms of environmental policies that can improve disaster preparedness? So rather than dealing with the aftermath and taking initiative to do with the aftermath, are there any policies that can really speak to preparedness? So Dr. Sambo, you have 2 minutes as well. Yes.
Thank you. I wish I had the whole day. But when we look at liability for corporate entities that are the source of pollution, I think we need, as a country, I know initiatives have already started moving towards a national action plan for business and human rights. This is particularly important for all businesses, but more so for the mining companies that are naturally polluting. And this brings me to this position. We know that mining is a necessary evil. It is an economic activity that's going nowhere because we need to sustain ourselves as a country. Now, we already know that mining is a polluting activity, but we also derive the economic benefits. And going forward, we have the critical minerals surge. Mining is expected to increase to up to, is it 3 million metric tons by 2030? So we already know this trajectory. We need to do more in terms of what I call preventive environmental maintenance. And this is already in the law as well. I think as citizens, what we can do in terms of step by step is hold our regulators. I think we always look to say, Boma Yanganepo. The power is in our hands. What are we doing to push the regulator to fulfill the monitoring and overall supervision of these business entities? And when we talk about policies and disaster preparedness, I still want to talk about prevention, because this is one of the critical principles in environmental law of prevention. We know that environmental harm is likely to happen. We need to put in mechanisms that are going to help us in terms of how to prevent. And I think we also need to be looking more at strengthening the coordination of regulators. I think when we look at the subject incident, we have at a minimum 3 regulators: the Water Resources Management WAMA, we also have ZEMA, and we have the Mine Safety Division. The coordination between and amongst these regulators is really important, as well as their capacity to handle their side of the regulatory mechanisms. But at the end of it all, as I said, it begins with each one of us. Are we making our regulators uncomfortable about not doing their job? I think let's do more as
Yeah.
individuals.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, again, I think what you're saying is the onus is on us to make sure that we are holding our regulators accountable. And I think platforms like this one really help to do that. If we, manage to get the regulators into platforms like this, they hear from us, and we push them to do the work that they're supposed to be doing. So we're running out of time, so we will go into closing remarks from each of the panelists. And I think panelists, I'll give you about 45 seconds to do your closing remarks. Please tell us, what should Zambia learn from this incident? We've already heard a lot about the devastating impacts of this, which we are likely to continue suffering for years to come. And so what key lessons can we draw from this? And what practical steps can you recommend to just strengthen the country's readiness to prevent and respond to such disasters going forward? So I'll circle back to Professor Kalava. I think you can give us your closing remarks in 45 seconds, and then we move on to Dr. Hangulu, to Dr. Muninda, and then lastly to Dr. Sambo.
Okay, thank you so much. So what I would like me to say is that as an activity of economic importance, we need to note that it has a lot of environmental impacts that we need to be aware of, knowing that these impacts not only affect us, but they will affect generations to come. And therefore, we need to look at the better mining processes and as well as managing of the waste. I would also like to say that we need to strengthen monitoring mechanisms. I know ZEMA does that, but I think we need to strengthen that more, especially as we look at increasing mining activities across the country. And lastly, I would say that we need to take care of our ecosystems.
Okay.
Benefits. Some of these who are not employed in the mines, but they depend on this ecosystem. So let's take care of the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kalava. Dr. Hangulu, your closing remarks in 45 seconds.
Thank you, everyone, for the attendance and for hearing us, and also for your commitments to this particular platform. And also would like to encourage everyone to be a brother's keeper. Let us be mindful and watchful of where we get our foods, and let us look out for each other. If we see any accidents, let's report them. And also let us all act like we've been encouraged in this platform. I wish everyone the best. We hope to meet again.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Mninda.
Thank you, Esther. And just very briefly to just remind us that even as we meet our present benefits, we should not be discounting the costs. Let's develop, but at the same time, be mindful of the discounted costs that we are incurring and that they'll have to be paid. And usually it's with our health. So with that being said, we need to provide a seat around this table for the health sector. The public health sector has to be part of these mainstream environmental sectors to talk about the human beings that are part of this ecosystem that end up receiving all this waste that comes from the various economic sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Sambo.
Thank you very much. I think mine is just to go back to issues of awareness. Those of us that are able to read and write, could we please get involved, tell people, equip them with this information that they have the right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, and they do not need to wait for anybody from Lusaka to come and realize that for them. In terms of activism around sites that are naturally polluted, I think the onus again is on us. These places need to be accessible. How do we counter the barriers in terms of security when there is a public interest issue? I'm talking about the areas around Sino Metals where the pollution came from. We need to do a lot of investigation around there in order to make some of the cases that are coming up before court successful, not just for the people in the areas there, but for all of us as a people in Zambia. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. I think it's been a great discussion, and we've heard a lot about all the environmental effects, which are really far-reaching and worse than we were thinking and has been reported. We've also heard about the health effects and the fact that our food may be contaminated as well, and we do not know the extent because we are yet to see the report that has come from the impact assessment that is being conducted. We have also heard about the public health system, the danger of heavy metal contamination to our health, and also that the fact that we do have environmental laws that we can turn to, and the onus is on us to make sure that we hold accountable those regulators who are supposed to be making sure that they monitor, making sure that they're testing the water, making sure that they're testing the soil. So from this, I think we've had so many important questions as well about environmental governance, public health, corporate accountability, and community resilience. So the conversation doesn't end here. As PRS, we commit to continuing to provide platforms like this where we can dialogue, and we really look forward to inviting the regulatory authorities, ZEMA, the ministries, to come on the platform with us to discuss what has been done, what mitigations are there, what is ZEMA doing, what are they going to do going forward, and also to discuss the results of the impact assessment, the environmental impact assessment that has been done on this Kafue River disaster. So thank you, everyone. Please look out also, we will try to get the environmental act that Dr. Sambo talked about and post it on our social media pages. So we'll post it on our website at prs.org.zm. We'll also post it on our social media pages on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on X. Look out for PRS 365. And we have posted a feedback survey in the chat. We are always looking to improve how we're doing things at PRS because we want to be excellent. So please feel free to fill in the feedback survey so that our next webinar will even be better. Otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and look out for this video, the recording of this webinar, as well as a write-up of a follow-up on the article, and look out for our next webinar. Hopefully, for the next one, we'll have the regulatory bodies and authorities as part of the panel discussion. Thank you so much. Stay safe, and we look forward to engaging with you in future programs. Thank you.